You're listening to SaskScapes, a podcast featuring the stories of arts, culture, and heritage in Saskatchewan. Welcome to episode 30 of SaskScapes. There is a part of our city's culture that many of us pass each day. It is not art, it is not the sound of a street busker, but it is part of our landscape, and still there is a story of heritage to be found here. This is a very special episode, which pays tribute to part of that culture and heritage, the culture of the marginalized person living on the street. Alvin Cote's presence on the streets of Saskatoon was known to many. Not always an easy story, and most certainly filled with a lot of humor, the life of Alvin Cote has touched the lives of many and continues to do so today. Many thanks to my first guest, Daryl Leachman of SkyApp, the Saskatoon Community Youth Arts Programming, and my second guest, Constable Derek Chesney, of the Saskatoon Police Department. Daryl and Chess share personal stories of how Alvin touched their lives and the lives of many others. I am at SkyApp in downtown Saskatoon with SkyApp's director, Daryl Leachman. And I've wanted to do this podcast for quite some time, and I know that my SaskScapes series is about arts, culture, and heritage in Saskatchewan. And in my mind, part of our culture are the people on the streets and the people who go about their busy lives, the corporate people, the shopkeepers, and the disenfranchised, the people who don't have a place to go home to every night, who have somehow fallen between the cracks. One gentleman in particular had a huge impact on me when this occurred. April 19th, 2013, Alvin Cote died, just a few days shy of his 60th birthday here in Saskatoon. And Alvin, it would not be an exaggeration to say that Alvin has touched the lives of more people than I think he even knew. And so I want to pay tribute to the memory of Alvin because he was such a huge part of the downtown culture of Saskatoon. Daryl really had a one-on-one relationship with Alvin, and so I thought that he would be the best person to represent the kind of character Alvin was and provide me with some great stories about how Alvin moved through life and the people he impacted. So thank you, Daryl, for willing to do this.
You're very welcome. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's also a pleasure to speak about Alvin. I think that Alvin's one of these people that a lot of people wouldn't want to give the time of day to and maybe, cross the street to go by. But Alvin, like a lot of people that have been, as you use the word disenfranchised, or as I'll use marginalized, a lot of people are in the position they're in for situations that often, start with not what they've put themselves into and what their circumstances and environment and even society to some degree has put them to. And they're not necessarily bad people or not necessarily even scary people when you get to know them. And Alvin is one of those people that, although he did have some times in his life when, violence was a big part of it, him as a person, if you get to know him, he was a very likable person with a great sense of humor, and he had a heart.
Mm-hmm.
So in speaking about someone like that, as you had said, we developed a relationship over a period of a couple of years, at least 2-3 years. And then to see him go when he did, even though every day you look at him and you think he's not going to last long, just with the kind of life that he's had and the kind of life that he's currently living, or was currently living. But nonetheless, when it happens, it's tough. It's a very tough time to lose someone like that.
Can you recall when you first encountered Alvin and what you were doing at the time that made that happen?
Oh, that's a tough one, because just walking through the downtown area, which I do on a daily basis, I would bump into him at various places. So I could not even give you a time, but he would have been somebody that was on the street, probably hanging out maybe in the bank shelter over here, the CIBC, where I would go because I use that bank to use the bank machine. There was times there that I would see him. I would see him outside of the Starbucks on 2nd. And then he started to come into our place. And that's really when we started to build a relationship. When he walked in through the front doors of the Saskatoon Community Youth Arts Program, or SCIAP, and had a seat in here. And then it kind of developed from there. So to pinpoint a time, or even a specific instance, I can't do that.
Right. But, well, I guess the question that would come to mind for a lot of people is, what's the difference between somebody that walks by someone like that and sees them as being feared or to be ignored, and somebody like you that sees somebody like Alvin be an opportunity for a connection with another human life?
Well, I think in fairness, with my history, it puts me in a different mindset that would maybe approach someone like that and think that, they're just like anyone else. But that's, again, the history that I have. It'd be unfair for somebody without my history, where, I had worked in a federal prison for 15 years and a maximum prison, as well as starting SCIAP for the purposes of helping people, and maybe not necessarily as old as Alvin, but younger people that are kind of on the road to living Alvin's life. So getting an idea of those kind of the kind of people that are in those positions and that are marginalized, and working as a personal development coach for marginalized youth, I think that it gives me a bit of a kind of a premonition to what I'm seeing with those people, as opposed to somebody else. So it's, to me, they're just like anyone else. I don't even know how to explain it. It's got to a point in life where there's no uncertainty. There's not a fear. It's more of, hey, how are you?
Maybe it's difficult for us to walk by somebody like an Alvin and think, well, that could never happen to me. But also, in the back of our minds, we all must be mindful that life circumstances can take us to places we would rather not think about, and have us in predicaments that we might not be able to climb out of. And perhaps it's easier to ignore an Alvin rather than face the reality of just how fragile life is on a day-to-day basis for us all, that nothing's set in stone, nothing is predictable. And that Alvin is an example of somebody, there's so much. If you Google Alvin Cote, it's staggering the number of hits that this man who lives on the street should garner so many hits on Google. In a blog called Cops and Bloggers, one of the police officers, Alvin was very well known to the police department here, commented that Alvin talked a little about his childhood, merely that he had many brothers and sisters, that his dad worked in a bush camp up by Hudson Bay. Alvin was born in Kamsack on the Cote First Nations, and his the chief, Gabriel Cote, was a prominent chief there, who was also part of Alvin's family tree, signed the Treaty 4 in 1874. So Alvin had a life, Alvin had a family, Alvin had people, he had heritage, and there he is sitting in the lobby of the CIBC. So again, there but for the grace of God go we, that anyone can wind up in the most bizarre circumstances. So you walk by these people because you see the humanity in them.
I do, for sure. And, although, again, I think it's kind of unfair to throw that at kind of the common everyday person that maybe hasn't had that history. The other thing that I think about, too, is I think, obviously, like you do, is that, and I know for a fact that a lot of people really in middle-income families and such are, almost a paycheck away from living on the street. And I know that because of the world that I'm involved in with homelessness and such, and you know that. But a lot of people, I don't think that. They think that they're not as vulnerable. They think that, because they've got family and they've got people around them and they've got these securities, that they're okay. But there are situations where, one certain thing happens. A fella who was a long-distance truck driver, for instance, got in a bad accident, and the company that he worked for didn't have the proper insurances, and because he was out of the country, they ran into a whole bunch of financial issues. And to cut a story short, this fellow put his whole family because of that accident, into a real financial dilemma. And then he started then he had some brain damage. So his wife started to have some difficulties in this relationship. And then next thing you know, she's leaving over a period of time because she's got to go do something, and he doesn't want a whole bunch of things evolved from this, right? And then this fella, at some point, a couple of years later, because he's got these mental health issues now, and then he goes to drugs to try and get rid of some of this pain because he's lost his family. And this fella, who was, a higher than middle income, he had a family of 3, he had a house, and, after a series of all these different events, 4 years later, he's living on the street. And then shortly thereafter, he's in the lighthouse. And he's got nothing except some mental health issues. And this person was no different than a person living with a house they've purchased in Caswell, maybe City Park area. Circumstances. Yeah. And the wrong circumstances, the wrong timing, and he's out. So it happens.
And so it happened to Alvin. His own set of circumstances brought him to his life here on the streets in Saskatoon. But over the time you got to know Alvin, what was it about his personality that had such an impact on people? Some people spoke of him and said perhaps he was an angel. He touched so many people's lives. Tell me a little bit about your impressions of Alvin and why he made such an impact. What set him apart from somebody who may completely alienate themselves? It sounds like he was quite a gregarious character.
Hey, it's Kevin. I hope you're enjoying the episode so far. Just a quick reminder that the SaskScapes podcast is available for free on your favorite podcast app, or you can stream it from your browser. Check out the show notes for the link. On the SaskScapes homepage, you'll notice something new under the logo called SaskScapes Plus. You can't miss it. There's a big button saying support with a heart icon next to it. I'd love it if you could click on that button and help keep this podcast series going. When SaskScapes launched in May 2014, it was the first podcast in the province celebrating arts, culture, and heritage. In fact, you'd have been pretty hard-pressed to find any Saskatchewan podcasts. So I'd like to think that we paved the way. It's been because of your support that this podcast is now in its 9th year. Okay, that's it. Enjoy the rest of the episode.
And I think there is one specific piece that does that and adheres people to him, and that's that if you actually do say a few words to him, or you do talk to him, or you give an opportunity for that conversation, Alvin was he was one of the most positive people that I think I've met in the last number of years. There was nothing really negative about what would come out of Alvin's mouth, and if it did, there was a laugh behind it, and just that, that's just what it is, and move on to something that's, that's happy, or something that's funny. And that's what made, actually, sitting down and chatting with Alvin was almost to some degree therapeutic, in the sense that I myself spent a lot of time talking with people on very difficult issues, and crisis management, and working with people when they're in very kind of distressed states. So to sit and speak with someone who had such a positive attitude, and such a, and not that those people had negative attitudes, definitely had reasons for, but nonetheless, Alvin was just was positive, and he was quick with a joke. He was very quick-witted. He laughed at my jokes, which is a positive.
Right.
He was a very personable person that had a good sense of humor, and he had a good heart. He had a good heart, and I know that he did some things as a younger man, and spent some time, quite a bit of time in jail for things, and but from what I gather, he always had that kind of, as you use gregarious as probably a good word, and that lively personality.
And his positive outlook seemed to lend itself to him he seemed to be a bit of a confidant.
Well, that's interesting. I don't know if they did. I mean, my relationship with Alvin was it was pretty much him and I. I know that here we have some wonderful staff and some great people coming in and out of here, but Alvin would just usually kind of sit on his own there, and everybody knew that Alvin can be here whenever he wants, and he can just sit in here regardless of what kind of things we have going on. Mm-hmm. And it was just that, because Daryl said that Alvin's cool and Alvin can be here. So there wasn't a lot of interacting where other people came into our conversations and that. So for me to comment on how, he was with that, I'm not sure. Ours was basically a one-on-one relationship.
Did he participate in any of the art
No.
projects here? He just kind of hung out and took it in?
No, he didn't really. He played cards. He played solitaire. Uh-huh. He played solitaire a lot, and he ate. I often made I'd make my own. I like to think I eat healthy, so I'd make my own soups. Lentil soups and bean soups and that, and whenever I had it here, and Alvin was here, he'd have some of my soup, and then tell me he's going to be farting for the rest of the day. So.
Right.
And I'd tell him, well, you know what? That might not stink as bad as the way you're smelling right now, buddy.
And he would laugh, of course.
Yeah, he would laugh.
And not be offended by that.
No, he would laugh, and he wouldn't be offended. As a matter of fact, I don't know how many people could do this, but I was able to get Alvin to come with me and to come in here at a specific time, which he wasn't very good at, mm-hmm. but he would do it when I asked him to meet me here at a specific time. He'd make sure that he got here. And I'd take him to a place down 20th and have him get showered up, and there's a time I got him some new clothes, and so he would do those things really for me, because he, living on the street and not being allowed to go into any of these places to shower and that, he brought with him an aroma that wasn't that pleasant to others, but nonetheless he would go with me, and he'd come and we'd go for a ride, and we'd do the whole thing, and then I'd wash his old clothes, and it was a time I got him a pair of pants that they didn't quite fit, like on the waist, and I thought that they would, but it's funny because he'd fluctuate. in his, because I'd take off for 2 weeks or so, and next thing he'll be back. And anyway, he says, oh, and they're like about 4 or 5 inches, like they didn't close at the front. And I said, oh, okay, we'll go back and get, no, these are good. And I couldn't get him to change. He's walking around for a number of days with like about 4 inches apart from his front there. But
he did take off a lot, and I was reading that sometimes he'd tell the police when they'd ask him where he'd been that he'd been to Vancouver or Toronto or down. Is that true? Did he actually go to these places?
Yeah, I can't say one way or the other, but I don't think so. I don't think so. He did have people, in Vancouver, and he had people in Ontario. Whether he got there, you know what? That's a mystery, and it's a mystery that I never pushed, right? Because I just laughed about it. I said, "Oh yeah, Vancouver, right?" Yeah, he'd say, "Yeah, I was in Vancouver." I said, "Oh yeah." And did you go to LA when you were? Not this time. It was. I didn't need to go there. It wasn't. I'm sure if Alvin wanted to tell me exactly about it, he always went. He went to visit his uncle or his sister, I never pushed anything like that.
But again, even if they were travels in his mind, they provided him, they kept his story going, something to talk about, something positive, and again, gave himself a sense of dignity, of being a person moving through life, accomplishing things, doing things, which... we all know people who have very, very safe, predictable lives and fantastic jobs, and who you really have to work hard to get one positive outlook out of them, And so here's this guy living on the streets, able to laugh under such adverse circumstances.
He never seemed. I can't. I honestly, I can sit here and say that he never seemed down. I cannot remember a time when, he said to me, "Oh, Daryl, I'm just like feeling really shitty today." And yet I look at him and I'm thinking, he must be feeling really shitty today. But would that ever come out of him? No, never. Right. As it went along, he started looking worse and worse. He drank anything that he could find.
And to that point, he was arrested more times than they could keep track of. And yet, there has to be a difference between the personality of Alvin Cote and somebody else who is arrested so many times that Alvin endeared himself to the police department here. Why did that happen? They felt a huge loss when he died. I've heard a lot of those guys talk, and he had a huge impact on their lives.
When I right away I'd say, "Oh, Alvin, you first of all, what are you drinking?" I know. Okay, I'm sorry. But then he'd laugh, and we knew it's going nowhere. Right. But the funny thing you mentioned is, he would tell me that all the time, that he's in Vancouver or he was in Toronto or up in Northern Ontario. And now that you tell me that he would tell the police, that is kind of odd, because I would just think that, he's probably in lockup. All those times when he was in Vancouver, I was just thinking, he's in jail. Right. So maybe, I don't know, maybe the times that he was staying in here like every day, because at certain times in winter, he'd be here literally all day. Right. And then all through the evening, because I'd stay here till the wee hours of the morning. So at any given day, he could be here, in and out without really finding a place to drink for 20 hours. Right. So maybe those times are the times when all of a sudden he'd meet a police officer 5 days later after that, and he'd say he was in Vancouver, when we were like, he was sitting here in the gallery. Right. And then maybe the times that he'd tell me he was actually in jail. Right. I don't know.
Maybe that's Alvin's last laugh, is that he's sitting back going, "You bunch of fools don't know whether I went away or not, do you?"
They don't. Yeah, you're right, we don't.
That's so funny.
It is, and because I never realized that he would tell the police the same thing when they didn't see him. So he did go somewhere, and maybe it was the flip-flop of jail to here, and maybe he had another place that we don't know about. That he did have a sister that he would see once in a while. Yeah. So, but yeah, you're right, and those things, he he wasn't in a hurry to just throw everything out either, right? Like to you. So, and again, I'm never one to pry. If somebody's going to tell me, they tell me, right? But
it's not a lie. He was very close to the police department. Really had a soft spot for Alvin.
Yeah. No, they did. Well, particularly a few officers. I mean, I don't know if everybody did, but there was definitely a few officers that, what I understand, were pretty good to him. Yeah.
Is that common that you hear officers really, really teary-eyed when they learn of somebody living on the streets passing away? I mean, that seems to me, from someone who doesn't know a lot about this life, that would be fairly rare, that they would just think, well, there we go, there's another tragedy.
Yeah, I'm with you. Again, and I'm sure you could speak to some other officers who are in there, and they have people. They'd probably tell you differently. They'll probably say, "Oh, we're human, like everyone." And but my experience, and I have been kind of close to the police, more so when we worked directly with the RCMP when I was working with federal corrections, and that's I can't say that I've seen that before in my lifetime.
Right.
Yeah. So
again, a testament to just something that this guy had.
He was a special guy. There's no doubt that Alvin was a special guy, and because he looked so rough, he was like one of the roughest looking. His face was weathered, and from my understanding, he was a pretty good looking young guy from what they tell me. And you look at him, and he looked so rough, and not somebody that a regular person is going to walk up and say, "Hey, hi," to, but more like, "Ooh, there's that guy there. I'm not going to go into there now." If he's in one of these little bank things and such like that. So,
but what a missed opportunity to meet somebody quite interesting.
Well, they'd get a different perception, I think, of life people. Of street people.
Yeah.
If they actually did, were forced into speaking, to having a conversation with Alvin in one of those little bank openings, one of those little bank vestibules there. They would. They would definitely get. They'd walk out of there with, wow. I thought that guy was gonna beat me or knife me or something, to that degree. And and with Alvin, it would never happen.
Right. Had you met any of his relatives at any time?
No. Not that I know of.
Right.
Yeah. No. As a matter of fact, I never once seen Alvin. Not that I can remember. I'd never seen him with anyone.
So he may have kept to himself, but he touched the lives of a lot of people in doing that.
Yeah, he definitely did, and I can just give you my own perception or my own opinion or what he's done to me. And to give you an idea of my background, is like I say, I spent 15 years in a maximum federal penitentiary working frontline and working with the emergency response team. Like the SWAT unit and also the dog team. And I came, and particularly in the most vulnerable or the most volatile prison in Canada, which was Stony Mountain between 1982 and 1985. So, I mean, I've seen a lot and I've been through a lot there, and I've met a lot of people in difficult situations and had a lot of friends, and then coming here and then starting SkyUp and really working and just absolutely being lucky enough to be engrossed in the lives of a lot of marginalized young people and help them and work with them and see their lives change. I've been touched a lot, and I've learned a lot, and I've been hardened a lot too. And yet, for someone like Alvin to, when I heard that he passed away, and I looked at that little thing that I seen in the paper, it brought me to some tears. I was driving in the car when I got the news, and it wasn't a good day. Right. So he was an enjoyable person to know and to befriend and to associate with.
There was a portrait painted by Corrine, there we go, her last name has escaped me, a portrait of Alvin.
and that portrait had been, I think it had been in the tribal council. It had been hanging on the walls in the tribal council, and the Saskatoon Police Department's just opened their new building here, and that was donated by the tribal council to the police department. And when they were interviewing the chief of the tribal council, he said the police department treated Alvin with humanity and with dignity. And I mean, what more can you ask for in treating somebody like an Alvin, when so many people do just see him at face value, see his physical attributes, and have the first gut instinct, go away, get away, get away. That the law enforcers treat him with such humanity and such dignity. Is that a commentary on the fact that these people are a part of our culture? They are a part of our downtown culture, and that if you just give yourself a second or two, you'll find out that judging a book by its cover is not just a cliche. It's something that denies you the opportunity to get to know a human being, no matter what their circumstances are.
It definitely does. The easy part, though, with Alvin is that as much as he might have been guarded in certain areas,
and you'd have to be,
he was not. He was overtly friendly. Like, he was overtly friendly, and he had a great sense of humor. And whereas a lot of street people, they're guarded to the degree where they look aloof. They look. They kind of look scary. They put on a hard. Even if they're not, they put on a mean thing because they're protecting themselves. And so the first little bit of interaction you have with them may not be that pleasant. But I know that a lot of those people really have that same heart that Alvin does.
Right.
And they do. They want to have a friend just like Alvin did. It's just that Alvin was blessed, I guess, with a specific personality that allowed him to have that gregariousness and that overt, just an effervescent type of a person.
Well, it sounds like he had a really well intact sense of self and self-image, that he could just go, well, this is me.
And you know what? And he'd known he was another person that tested himself during his younger years. So he had nothing to prove to people. In his mind, he went through the prison. He was a tough guy, and he had his reputation and that. So he knew that he didn't have anything to prove to anyone.
What a great lesson for people walking around with huge self-esteem issues that are wasting so much time trying to be something that they're not.
Totally.
Then there's this person with nothing going for them as far as life circumstances, just saying, this is what you get.
Yeah, and being proud of being proud of the little things that, there's a few things in his life that he was proud of. He was proud that he went through the prison system, and he was a tough guy. And he was proud of that, and he kept that, and I knew about that, and he told me little stories about that, and that's, but now he looked at himself as, now I'm old and I'm whatever, and he'd laugh about his vulnerabilities now.
It's interesting you should say that in this article that I got online at the police blog. This is Officer Chesney who wrote this piece, and he asked Alvin if he was related to Chief Gabriel Cote, and Alvin made a fist and began to pound his chest like an angry yet proud gorilla and yelled, "That's my family. How do you know about him?" So he had a great sense of pride in his heritage.
Yeah, that's pretty neat.
Your work here at SkyUp is very much focused on being a motivator for Aboriginal youth, and so that seems to be to me a carryover of the same kind of caring that you had for Alvin. That you really want to honor people's best version of themselves despite their circumstances. Yeah.
Exactly. No, that's exactly it. And in fairness to me, the when I see somebody who's the most vulnerable, that's the one that I want to, see if I can make an impact on.
It's no coincidence that that happens. My life in the performing arts, 100% of the time, whenever I hear people perform who I'm evaluating, who appear to be the most vulnerable, the most insecure, they are the people that that make us all misty-eyed, because what they give is so authentic and so real, because it comes out of, well, it's tapped into pain and struggle and overcoming and all that. There's nothing superficial about those kinds of personalities, and you must find that once you spend time with the youth here, that you think, wow, it's because of your circumstances that you are possibly more fascinating than you have yet to realize yourself.
Well, yeah, and the along those same lines is unrealized potential is they don't realize really how strong they are and how much resolve that they have. Because you'll put them onto a challenge that is maybe a different form of challenge in life. I mean, they're so used to being so street smart and so street strong, and they have more the strength that they have to get through the life that they've gone to so far, and to be still to be sane and still be where they're at and how they are is incredible. So what I like to try and do is try to get them to use some of that amazing strength that they have.
We all know people that have seemingly perfect lives and wake up saying there's got to be more than this, and that Alvin, perhaps that was enough.
Yeah, that is so interesting. And there's I have to think that there could be some belief to that, because I know there's lots of people around me that they're not happy, and yet you'd think that they had the world by the tail, so to speak. And then I even look at myself and my own kind of journey through life, and I was in a position where I was living that supposed house, or that supposed life that's supposed to be so great. You have a beautiful, wonderful, amazing wife, and you have big house, and then you buy a bigger house, and new vehicles, and you got a secure job, and she's got a secure job, and things are supposed to be going pretty good, right? And you think, yeah, so whatever. But but I was missing something, and did I know what I was missing? I didn't know what I was missing until, that was all given up. And I went down to working a job that was less than half the pay that I was making, at the top end in corrections, and working with young, vulnerable, marginalized Aboriginal youth. And all of a sudden, life started to really become great. There was a time now when all of a sudden I didn't need to buy a new car. I didn't need to go out to eat 3 times a week, at a restaurant. I didn't need to go to all these events, these comedy events, and all these different things that I didn't need to spend that money. That
it
I
wasn't
was.
the stuff.
Yeah, it wasn't at all. Yeah. And next thing you know, it was like I'm making like less than half, and all of a sudden I'm accumulating a few dollars, and it's like, what the hell? I'm saving money? I'm not even trying. It's just, it was great. Like I was working with these people, and and I was going play catch and doing these. Just, it was a different thing when you start making it. When I started making a difference in people's lives in a positive way, it really changed. It changed me. It made me all of a sudden like, wow, like this is pretty cool. I mean, I'm happy.
Maybe revenue just isn't measured in dollars and cents. Maybe it's measured in the impact you have on others' lives.
It definitely isn't. And as a matter of fact, I left a little bit of a quote with a number of people in the World Junior Tournament. We had these gifts to give to the World Junior Hockey Championships, and I had left a quote within one of the gifts that we had made for the MVPs of of the tournament from all different countries through SkyUp, and that was basically that, in a way to look at success is not necessarily what you do or what you get, but what you do and what you achieve with others or for others. And that's what I've found. It's not what you get, or it's not what you can accumulate or what you can get. It's really what you can do for others. That to me is the epitome of success.
In your own circumstances, and maybe Alvin's circumstances, what he was able to do for others, maybe many people didn't even know until after he had passed what he was doing for them in his own simple, imperfect life that he led. He was in his own way doing something for others.
I think that he was, because Alvin was not he was not dumb in any way. Mm-hmm. So he knew what other street people were doing. He knew about the different kind of violence that's going on the street, and all those type of things. And he wasn't partaking in that. He had his own way of dealing with people, and it's like you say, he was good to people. He made an impact. You know what? I'm sure if you speak to people that have came through my life here through Urban Canvas and through SkyUp, they'll say that I made an impact on their lives. Well, I can sit here and I can honestly say that Alvin made an impact on my life in a positive way.
I'm going to read something at the end of this blog that Officer Chesney wrote. I found out today that Alvin passed away a few days ago, and I must admit I feel an emptiness. It will be different as I walk my downtown beat, knowing that he will not be in one of the banks, and I won't have to make a special trip to go check on him. As an officer, you encounter many individuals, but you remember certain people because they are special, and Alvin was that one special person. Alvin was not a rich or well-accomplished man. He drank daily and chose to make the street his home, but he was tough, he was a fighter, and he was a survivor. It brings a tear to my eye to think of the bad things that happened to Alvin in his past to push him to lead the life that he has led, but in that, I do hope that he will find peace wherever he may now be. Farewell, my friend. You will be missed by many. That doesn't get written about the best of people who live extremely functional lives. Here's this guy hanging out in bank lobbies. That should garner such.
I have difficulty just listening to you read that, actually. So,
if I accomplish one thing in this entire series, it's to capture stories of people who are about to leave us or who are no longer with us, so that we have an oral history of these lives that have touched our community and our province, because that is culture as much as a piece of art hanging on a wall or a sculpture on a street. What makes us who we are is part of our culture. So I feel privileged and am grateful that I was pointed in your direction, because it would be hard to find somebody to fittingly tribute to Alvin and the life and the impact that he made. And I really sincerely want to thank you for taking the time to do that so honestly.
I was looking forward to it because, like I say, I still have a picture of Alvin because he was he's as good as any person I met. So
you can't have better tribute than that. And here's hoping, in all those trips that he made to Vancouver and LA and Toronto, that he knew that he was really just making a huge impact on people's lives. Thank you, Daryl.
You're very welcome.
I left my podcast on the story of Alvin Cote off with Daryl Leachman at SkyApp. And I had, at the end of that session, read a piece that had been published, written by Constable Derek Chesney. And at that time, I had not anticipated that I would have the opportunity to meet Constable Derek Chesney. And lo and behold, here I am a couple of weeks later, sitting across from Chess, as your friends call you. So you're actually here, and I couldn't be more thrilled to continue Alvin's story with you. So thank you for agreeing to meet with me.
My pleasure to be here, Kevin. Alvin's story, like we had just mentioned in our previous conversation here, is a story that needs to be told. And in this modern day, with pretty much every so-called theme or element of people's lives being portrayed in books and movies and stuff like that, this is still kind of a new yet unique thing, but yet still not uncommon in our Saskatchewan fabric, for sure.
Right. Just before we get into how Alvin impacted your life, I want to talk a little bit about where you were born and your upbringing that informed the sensitivity that you have as you walk the beat in Saskatoon, which seems to really be quite significant in your story. So you were raised on a cattle ranch in southern Saskatchewan, pardon me.
You betcha, yeah. I coming from a mixed ancestry myself, bit of Hungarian, Polish, German, Ukrainian, bit of English. Growing up around a lot of First Nations people, Soto to the north, and Crees to the west, and stuff like that. You kind of get and everybody lives in fair. Everybody kind of works with each other, and there are certain people that always have a chip on their shoulder, but for the most part, everybody in small rural areas, and we just talked about that kind of from where you're coming from, out in the Far East in the Maritimes, that, you know what, eventually you're going to need this help of somebody, so why not get along? So.
Right. And it's a great advantage to grow up in an integrated area of the country, like the area you grew up in, because you probably had a tremendous appreciation and empathy for our First Nations in the area that you grew up in.
Well, my grandfather was a brilliant man. I think he had a grade 6 education, and growing up, I was constantly getting books jammed in my face. Read this. Have a look at this. What do you know about this? So Grandpa, being a first generation Canadian of Polish Hungarian ancestors that come from Poland in the late 1800s, and ironically went down to Texas for a number of years before they kind of come up to Saskatchewan. So Grandpa was a seeker of knowledge, and kind of instilled that in the back of my head. And I didn't realize it till I attended university in my 30s, years later, that he was kind of prepping me for what was all out there, and making me realize that, you know what, there's probably more for you than staying on the farm, and kind of opening that door. And he never had the opportunity to do it, so I kind of felt I was picking up where he left off in kind of the elements that he trained me in, or kind of showed me kind of the proper way to do things. So in that area that I did grow up in, like I said, my grandpa called First Nation people his brown brothers. And he would always talk about the first Canadians and stuff like that. And he'd always tell me, he goes, you know, we may look different, but we share a lot of similarities. And, you know, you're a young kid, you're 16, 17, 18, 15 years old, and you're like, what are those, like, yeah, they're different, and they're native and stuff like that. What do those guys have in common with us? And I didn't understand it till years later, till I went to university and actually started learning about the residential schools and colonialism and oppression and stuff like that. Well, that's why a lot of Eastern European people ended up in Saskatchewan. They faced some of that same stuff back in Europe, and came to Canada for a better life. So First Nations people were here, and then they kind of had the reverse thing happen to them with things. So
yeah, it was sociology you studied.
I did sociology, a lot of religious studies classes. If you could make a living at studying religion, I probably would have stuck with a religious studies degree, but culture, religion, and stuff like that, and that really kind of gave me a good framework to assist me with my job currently, but also opened the door to in studying comparative religions, you know what? Everybody, first off, is quick to point out the differences in people. And the one thing that I always notice that those differences are sometimes very minute, but people make them into the big picture. But once you dig past the surface of the differences, you find we have a lot more in common with a lot of people. It was something that I went to India years later.
Yes, I was going to. So
we'll go into that. We'll go into that. And you know what? India was amazing. I was taking some. I had taken some Eastern religion classes at the University of Saskatchewan, and one of the professors, who ironically had worked at the Canadian consulate in India a number of years before, was planning a trip with another professor, a political studies prof, who actually had quite a passion for India and actually had worked at the Canadian consulate at different times. So 20 of us headed off to India, ranged from 18 to 70. There was 3 guys, 2 professors, and the rest were gals. And we spent 6 weeks touring through northern India. And over there, there is nothing here that is the same as back home. But then once I got to know some people and got to see kind of what made people tick a bit, you realize, okay, there's a lot more of the same here than not. I fell in love with the people of the Sikh faith. And what was amazing is that those boys make up a big chunk of the Indian Army. They treat their elders well. They're farm-based people. And I said, who does that sound like? That sounds like Saskatchewan farm boys who excelled in World War I and World War II, are farm-based, rural-based, even though we have moved to the cities sometime later. So that's just one example of a lot of similarities that you can see in people that look totally different.
Yeah.
So
you wrote in this piece that you sent me, I was in a sea of people that did not talk like me, look like me, or even dress like me. I was a stranger in a strange land. And for a moment, I felt very empty and alone and removed from everything that I knew as familiar and common. Again, I can't help but thinking that has to inform the way you approach the people that you see living on the streets, who must feel very marginalized and not belonging.
You know, Kevin, it's interesting, but in my job as a beat officer downtown, I interact with our cities less fortunate.
Yeah.
A lot of drug users, people struggling with mental health, poverty, addictions, and sometimes all of the above. And me growing up in a fairly comfortable, normal environment, although albeit not perfect, but yet at the end of the day, when you look back of being fortunate and stuff like that, having support of my dad and grandparents and stuff like that was amazing. And so many of these people, they didn't get that. So I know when you kind of look at things that you kind of got to wonder sometimes why people end up where they do. And I could never for once understand why a person ended up, and I shouldn't be judging ever. And that's something that I really try to do every day, is not to judge when I'm out there, because I don't know what that person has experienced or the way they have viewed the world or what has been done or not done to them. So
everybody has a story.
You betcha. We all do. We all do.
We all do. Yeah. And so 4 years ago, you began working the beat.
You betcha I did. Yeah, you know what? When I started, I got into policing later on in life. Was a cattle rancher for a good chunk of my life. Raised some sheep and a lot of cows. Prior to that, played a little bit of junior hockey in Saskatchewan. Did some coaching, and then mad cow disease hit in 2001.
Right.
And that kind of made me take a look in the mirror and start wondering, okay, is there a little more out there for me? So that's when I ventured off to the city and on to school. And I knew that if I ever could do something other than being on the farm, I'd like to be a police officer. I think that is a pretty noble career. It gives us a chance to maybe atone for some of our wrongdoings in our earlier years and kind of give back. And in the end, maybe help people that aren't in a position to help themselves. So I was still in my training period, and there was an old fella, 30-year member, just retired a couple years ago, named Doc Campbell. Now, Doc was not a big man. He stood about 5'8", 160, 170 pounds, but yet he carried himself like he was 6'3", 220. And I had the opportunity in my training period to walk the beat with him one day, and I fell in love with it. It was like, okay, this is why I have signed up to do this job. So got a chance to work with him and kind of became friends with him after that. And he was kind of a gruff old bugger, but yet the biggest heart in the world. And I think he just he had been around for so long that he knew kind of where to step in and where to step out, and just kind of kept to himself and did his thing. So it was coming up, his retirement, and he asked me one day, he goes, "Where are you working next year?" This was late in the fall, October, November. And I said, "Oh, I'll probably go work East Side again." He goes, "Well, Beat's going to be open next year. You should put your name in for it." I said, "Well, I don't know if I'll get it." He goes, "Put your name in, you'll get it." So that was kind of the torch was so to say passed. And like I said, I've been out there 4 years. It's been a wonderful learning experience. Every day is a lot of the same, but then a lot different too. Because everybody, we're different every day. As much as the weather changes, our internal weather changes as well. So
it's undeniable that the people living on the streets of the beat you walk are as much part of our culture as anybody else. And so you and I are on the same page that there's something about Alvin Cote's story that is bigger than I think any of us could realize, and that there is a purpose to his life that is shrouded somehow, and I would like to think a mystery of being able to affect people even when Alvin is no longer with us. And who'd have thought that would come from somebody who's living on the street? Dennis was your FTO?
Yep.
So was that the first time you encountered Alvin when he was out? Tell me about that confrontation between Alvin and Dennis.
Well, it was interesting, and we never did quite figure out why Alvin didn't like Dennis that day. Alvin could be very temperamental. There was time, like I mentioned before, there was times that I could sit and talk for hours and couldn't get away from him. Then there was times he was so crabby and growly. He's like, "I hate you, get out of here, I'm going to kill you." And I knew where he was coming from. So, but that first day, Dennis was my field training officer, FTO, and I'd been on the street, this would have been probably January, February, March, April of 2009. And we got a call. I remember it was a Saturday, kind of a sunny, cold winter's day. And we got a call down by the old train station, corner of 25th, actually just across the street here from where we're sitting right tonight. At 25th and Ottawa, and there was an older, gray-haired man with a beard, and he was yelling and scaring people. So Dennis is like, "Well, that's probably Alvin." So I'd heard all these stories of this kind of legendary, wild old fighter. And I was pretty excited because I've always been a human interest person. Like my thing is, if somebody doesn't like a bunch of people, I try and get them to like me. And what's interesting enough is that day we rolled up to Alvin, and the minute he seen Dennis, he just started screaming, "I hate you, I hate that guy." And I'd never met him before. He looks at me and he goes, "Get that guy out of here." So I'm like, "Hey, Dennis, get out of here." So Dennis looks at me and goes and hops in his car and drives away. Now, being a brand new recruit, you kind of don't really leave your trainee behind.
No kidding.
So I'm like, "Okay, I guess he must trust me. I'll kind of wing it, and what's the worst that can happen?" So I walked up to Alvin. I said, "What's going on here?" He goes, "I hate that guy." I said, "Yeah, but you don't hate me. We never met before." He kind of looked at me, and I said, "What's your relation to Chief Gabriel Cote?" And he looked at me, and I kind of caught him out in left field. Kind of caught him off guard because having grown up in the southeastern part of Saskatchewan, I got tons of friends on Cote and Kisagoose and know the whole story of Chief Gabriel Cote. He was one of the chiefs who signed Treaty 4, and I knew Alvin was a descendant of his, having the last name Cote. So he goes, "How do you know about him?" And I said, "Oh, I know about him." I said, "Tell you what, let's go." I said, "We've got to take you on in today. Let's get going here." So he goes, "I'm a fighter." I said, "Well, you know what? I heard you're a lover." And he started to laugh. His gruffness broke, and he goes, "Well, I'm that too, you know." Right. So I got him up, and the old guy was pretty drunk that day. And in the meantime, now Dennis had pulled around the block and was back there. I said, "I got a new car here for you. Get in." So put him in the back, and we're driving downtown, and all of a sudden he starts tapping on the silent patrolman, which is the glass that is in between the back seats and the front seat. I go, what's going on? He goes, I'm hungry. And he was holding up a $5 bill. So I said to Dan, I said, hey, do you think we get him something? He goes, oh, yeah. So we pulled down on 2nd Avenue by the old McDonald's, and I ran, and they had a deal on double cheeseburgers that day. So I think I actually had to throw in about 30 cents, but I got him 2 double cheeseburgers, and he happily ate those all the way back to the station. And I went to check on him a little later once we got him booked in, and he was sound asleep in cell. So this was that was my first of many, many, many encounters with Alvin over the years. So.
And he had been brought in many times.
Many times. I know about a year before he died, the Star Phoenix did a little story on him, and I think it was published that it was up in close to 900 arrests over the years. So,
but not everybody who has that kind of a record becomes some kind of a special friend with the police.
No, it's...
Why did that happen for Alvin?
Well, you know what? I had all sorts of comments after about the Stockholm syndrome and your tormentors become your friends and stuff like that. And I disagree with that totally. You know what? I knew back in the day, and I'd been told stories from some officers that Alvin, and he had a couple of brothers in town here, that they fought with the police constantly over the years, and by no means were saints.
Yeah.
But yet, I think we all evolve as people over time, whether we are in a good environment or a bad environment. And I think over the years, Alvin slowed down a lot and softened a lot. And I caught Alvin admittedly at the tail end of his time. And you always hear stories of the guy that was not a good person his whole life to his kids, and then in the end being a great grandparent and stuff like that down the road, and maybe sometimes seen the error of some of his ways, and felt that or maybe had got some of that stuff out of his system. I don't know, but like admittedly, I did get Alvin at the end of his career, and you could see he was a salty old dog. But me being who I am and liking to break down barriers and stuff like that, I ended up spending quite a bit of time with him and got to know him on quite a different level than I think a lot of people did. So
there's also another historical component here that you wrote about when you were in university studying sociology, and there was a textbook that you were reading, a sociology criminology textbook.
Yeah.
Tell me about who penned that book and the connection.
Well, ironically, like I'd mentioned prior, I studied sociology, criminology, and at the U of S, there's a great Native Aboriginal justice program, kind of looking at basically the issues that are current and the transgenerational stuff that's been carrying on since the residential schools and the whole colonialism thing. So there was a textbook called Marginality and Condemnation, and a lady had written a story in there, and her name was Helen Cote. So Cotes are quite a well-known name and stuff like that, and they're probably related. And this textbook really, this chapter in this textbook really kind of hit home with me. I referenced it numerous times, would kind of go read it and stuff like that. And I know Alvin had a sister in town that kind of looked after him. And it wasn't until quite later on that I actually realized that Helen Cote was Alvin's sister. So the part of the story that Alvin couldn't tell me or didn't tell me, the textbook filled in, and so it kind of gave me a little bit more of the bigger picture of Alvin and his family and everything that kind of goes along with where he ended up. So,
what got Alvin to where he found himself in life, in your opinion?
Well, to lead into that, police are, and especially beat officers are, we're cut from a different cloth. And you always hear the story when there's a problem and people are running away, people are running to. Right. The police officers are running to the problem. And I remember years ago watching a National Film Board documentary called Whistling Smith. And Whistling Bernie Smith was a Vancouver police officer who walked the beat in the 70s, almost 40 years ago in lower Vancouver, when drugs were just kind of coming in and stuff like that. And he said, street people are wonderful, and they all have their stories. And he said, but police officers are street people as well. So to kind of build on what you were saying about most people would see Alvin downtown, and I knew many people would drop him some change or whatever and stuff like that. But most people, I believe, sometimes don't want to maybe get the story, because maybe the story, they know his story is probably filled with a lot of pain. And a lot of times that pain within his story might stir up painful stories from each of us. And but in that, I do believe that you actually, if you go through that and work through that, you can kind of come to a different place within yourself and hopefully help that person a little bit as well.
Do you find when you're talking to somebody living on the street a little bit about their story and where they came from, do you find that really disarms them and that you forge a bond just because you take that moment to care, or do they see right through that?
You know what? Every situation is a little different, and for the most part, street people take a long time to trust because they've had a lot of bad things happen to them. They've been let down. They've been taken advantage of. So that, and especially me coming in as an authority figure with this red stripe and this gun on my hip and stuff like that, and have a job to do and have the power and authority to arrest them or give them a ticket or give them a stern talking to and stuff like that. So it's quite a fine balance, especially for an officer. Like, I know the boys in the cars and the gals, their action with people, their interaction with people is, I don't think they have time to build the relationship. It's quick, it's fast paced. They're from one end of the city to the next. It's a different kind of policing. The policing that the beat is, and my partner and I were talking about this last night, it hasn't changed much in the last couple 100 years. You look at Sir Robert Peel, the Bobbies back many years ago in London, and the whole idea of the people are the police are the people. We're just members of the community that have been given a little extra authority to make sure the status quo is kept, but we're no different than nobody else. So as far as building relationships with people on the street, it's trust takes time. And there's some people that take a bit of time to warm up, and then there's some people that they will never trust you, and that's an unfortunate side of things. But it doesn't stop me from continuing to try every day and realize that a lot of times people are held back by biases or mental illness or whatever. So,
yet you can't help. I mean, you can't fix it for them, right? I mean, you can't intervene and try to make things better. So do you have to stay slightly removed from their circumstances that way? I mean, is there a part of you that goes home at night and thinks, I wish there was something I could do?
Definitely. And I don't think there's, police officers sometimes get a rap for being aggressive and stuff like that. And you know what? I think a lot of times people aren't getting the whole story. 99% officers I know, if you went and talked to the people that hired them in that final interview and you were asked why you want to be a police officer, they say, I want to help people. I want to give back to my community. I want to live in a safe community and I want to be a part of that. I want to help people who can't help themselves. And there is a level of your boundaries have to be good. Like I can't be taking every guy home with me and looking after him. But you know what? A quick chat on the street, a handshake, a positive comment from me, a coffee, even a wave across the street now. You can see people that are living in our communities that are very much a part of the fabric, but yet are kind of invisible. And I look at it that when I do chat with these people and the other beat guys and officers in town, when you do take that little bit extra time, it makes them visible. And they can feel that visibility that they're a part of the community and they're people too. And to have their stories heard and I kind of leave it out there sometimes. I usually tell a little bit about myself, and then they share a little bit about themselves. And I had an old uncle that used to say 2 short visits are better than a long one. And that's very much my job. Quick 5 minutes here and there, 2 minutes here, a wave, a pat on the back, a hey Chess, how are you? Or a hey so-and-so, how are you doing? Boy, you're looking good today. What's new? Weather, sports, you name it, politics. You get into it for 2-3 minutes and move along, and you can sense in people that you have boosted them, and to me, that's my a little bit of satisfaction.
In general terms, I know that you've uncovered a little bit of Alvin's story early on in his years that caused tremendous amount of pain that obviously informed where he ultimately wound up on the street. Yeah?
Yeah. Alvin did attend residential school. And, I can't imagine, now, being a parent myself, I can't imagine somebody coming and taking my kids away.
Yeah.
And taking my kids away, and you don't see them for months on end, and the clothes that I made them, and the hairstyle that they had, and the language they spoke, and all that kind of stuff is cut and taken away. And you look at the residential school process and I'll be blunt, it was designed to, and it's been quoted numerous times, to knock the Indian out of the kids, and they took that bottom generation. Now I know with Alvin's family, and when the kids got taken away, the parents were devastated. First Nations families, as much as anybody else, are close-knit, even more so community-based, generational, where grandparents and aunts and uncles, and there's a lot more, like us Europeans, we can move all over the world and start again and do things, but I know in many First Nations communities, if you were banished from the community, that was worse than death. So to have all that stuff just snipped, all those roots, all that religion, all that culture, all that language, on top of it, abuse, whether it be sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse that so many of these kids endured, it transgenerationally fragmented out to generations of really damaged and people that had all their roots taken away. Like me, I've been in the city 10 years. If I start feeling a little bit off, a few days back at the ranch, working with the cows, helping Dad fix some fence, hopping on the old horse and going for a ride, spending time where my family has been since the 40s, the place that I grew up on, that grounds me. But if any of us had all of that stuff taken away, it puts you in a your support system is the whole thing of forming our psyche and keeping us all in balance. Right. So it would be a continual struggle to try and stay afloat.
But even with all that taken away, the power of the story is so huge that you can walk up to Alvin and ask about his kin.
Yeah.
And instantly he lights up. So the story, you can't take the story away from the person.
Yeah, you know what, and I knew that day too. Like we had mentioned before this interview about you can pretty much make a connection with anybody. And I've traveled a lot and been around a lot, and Saskatchewan is a small place. And if you've played any hockey or played any sports or have lived in a few places, and we're all related here.
Yeah.
There's you go back, Saskatoon, a lot of people that are here aren't from here. We've all moved into the city. So we all got roots to the smaller places. And yeah, you do have that connection to your ancestors, even if you are far removed. You're correct.
Right. Most people would not survive that trauma of an early life as a child in the residential school system into many of their young adult years before, perhaps finding themselves in an untimely demise of some sort. Alvin found his life on the street, which seems insurmountable in and of itself. So he's got a double whammy. And the magic of Alvin is that he laughed so much and he had such a positive attitude in the face of all that. Not a lot of people survive even one of those life shifting moments. Why did Alvin?
Do you know what? There was something different about Alvin. And when I was in India years ago, and I'd see the old wandering holy guys around, the sadhus and stuff like that, the people that have, and this is totally foreign in our Western idea, but to prevent numerous rebirths over and over again, the people will basically, at whatever age, they will basically have their own funeral. The family says goodbye to them, and they venture out, a lot of times heading to a lot of the holy places along the Ganges, Varanasi, Hardwar, Rishikesh. And they basically live out their last bunch of years trying to unattach themselves from what the Hindu faith and Buddhist faith believes that keeps us from coming back over and over and over again. There's something better beyond this earthly realm. And when I got to know Alvin and knew about the compensation he had gotten from the residential schools and land claim compensation and that stuff that means something to us meant nothing to him. And I would chat with him numerous times, and he'd go missing for weeks on end sometimes. So I think sometimes he was at his sister's, sometimes he was probably in corrections, but I'd always ask him, hey, where you been? I've been missing you. I was in Vancouver, or I was in Toronto, or I was in LA. I'm like, Laurent? She's like, no, the real LA. I said, what do you, I said, did you like it there? Well, he goes, there's a lot of fighting there and gangs and stuff like that, and I like fighting. I said, well, what about Vancouver? He goes, nah, too big, I don't like it there. I said, well, you know, the Vancouver police, I know some of those guys, they seem like a pretty good bunch. No, don't like those guys. I said, well, what about us? Saskatoon police. He goes, no, I don't like you guys either. I said, well, what about me? He goes, well, I wouldn't be talking to you if I didn't like you, did I? So, you know, you speak of that humor, and he always had it, like his soul, you couldn't break him down. And like, I know he'd never read Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And I thought of that, and I'm like, that just shows me that no matter what we as people endure, there's things that you can't break out of us. And that's what drew me to Alvin, as much as me and many other officers who kind of kept watch for him and gave him sandwiches and gave him cigarettes. And I remember one time I was cleaning out my closet, and I had a kind of a old Roy Rogers cowboy shirt. It was white with embroidered flowers and red roses and horseshoes on the thing. And I gave that to him, and he proudly wore that around for quite a while. And I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool to have that. So, but
The unbreakable Alvin Cote.
Yeah.
He's like that elusive man on the top of the mountain that everybody wants to climb to get the meaning of life.
Totally. You know what? Totally. And he totally was and the sage, like you say. And even now, I'll share a little story with you, something that happened a little while ago. We just recently moved into our new police station.
Here we are. Beautiful.
It is. And I knew that, in knowing Alvin, I knew that he was kind of eternal. Like he just would keep going. Nothing could ever really get him down. So we move into the new station, and I'm moving into my nice new big locker. And after Alvin's passing, a funeral director from a funeral home in Kamsack got a hold of me, knew Alvin, and wrote about Alvin, the blog and stuff like that. And he dropped off a couple of funeral bulletins. So I had them in. I've given a few of them out to people that I knew were special to Alvin and stuff like that. And so I had one, and I hung one up in my locker. So that afternoon, I was out at a barbecue way out kind of in the north end, and a lady came up to me who had listened to me speak about Alvin at a racism breakfast a couple months ago. And she said, I heard you talk, and what you've done for First Nations people, you don't even know what you've done in a positive light and stuff like that. And I said, ironically, I said, I had this funeral bulletin of Alvin. And I said, I hung it up in my locker today. And she held out her arm, and her whole arm turned to goosebumps. And she goes, oh, Spirit's here. And immediately, my whole body, my whole neck, my whole everything went to goosebumps. And I can feel it right now again, too. And it made me chuckle, because I knew that, this was somebody very special that is even still connecting and affecting people even after he's passed on. And the weight of Alvin's life and Alvin's story, from being a ragged street person that was kind of invisible, to being now a very visible and elemental featured person in kind of the history of, he's like a spokesperson for everybody that kind of has gone through stuff similar to him.
I had mentioned that whole being the LA story and Toronto, Vancouver. Do you think he actually went?
Do you know what? I don't know. Like, you know what? It don't. You know what? Knowing him, you never bloody know.
But you know what? We laughed about the fact that even if he didn't, it was hysterical that in his mind he did, and that's all that really mattered.
Like, you know, we think about street people. Okay, no education, no this, no that. You know, every time he'd get brought into cells, he'd be like, I need something to read. But he liked Reader's Digest. But his main thing was National Geographic. He goes, I want the book with the animals and the yellow on the cover. So then I'd find him one. And there is a story about one time, I was not working at the time, but somebody gave him a Reader's Digest that had Anne Murray on the cover. And I don't want to insult someone kind of from your neck of the woods.
I love my Anne Murray.
But Alvin had a dislike for Anne Murray. Nobody ever knew why. I don't know if he knew her music or whatever, maybe she looked like an old girlfriend or something, but he lost it and started screaming and yelling, probably about as much as he yelled and screamed at Dennis that day about Anne Murray. So, but yet again, that spirit and that character and that humor. Okay, the guy's being arrested. He's brought in for whatever charges, and he's freaking out about getting a Reader's Digest with Anne Murray on it. So
that is so funny. And if you're listening, I'm a huge fan. That's very funny. I just love the fact that he may not have been to any of those places, but he was so convincing. We all believe it anyway. You
know what? And when I look at him, and I would play into it with him, and he knew Vancouver was big, and you know, here was this guy who, street-wise, was a genius. Yeah. But yet, you know what? You can be smart in a lot of different ways. And not to say that Alvin wasn't intelligent, but you know what? He was brilliant on survival. And that was the thing that got me. Is that, you know what? To sleep outside in the cold and walk around with no toque on and no mitts, and bounce from bank lobby to us to back alleys and stuff like that. And I was like, wow, this guy's amazing. Like the survival, just being able to endure almost anything.
He would laugh at those survivors.
It was not a big deal. I mean, I get cold, and he'd always get upset in the summertime because he didn't like the heat. So I'd run into him, and I'm like, what's going on? It's too hot. He'd say, it's too hot. I'm like, where are you going? He goes, I'm going up to the Yukon to work in the mine. And I think he probably did work in the mine because he mentioned that numerous times back in the day. And then I'd see him next. I said, when are you going? He'd go, Friday. I'm like, when are you coming back? He's like, well, no, I don't know. When it cools off. So then I'd see him next block again. I'm like, when are you going? He goes, Friday again. So he was an interesting man. I could talk for hours about him, and he had a huge kind of impact on me. So,
you weren't on the beat when he died, but he did die in circumstances which made you feel, if one could, at least somewhat comforted. Tell me about that.
Well, you know, like we mentioned before about we can never know how someone else is feeling. And we can, they always say you can walk a mile in someone else's shoes, but you really can't. And to me, I always thought me or one of the other beat guys would have been the person that would have found Alvin down some back alley, some cold winter's night. And when I found out that he died at St. Paul's Hospital, he was in a warm bed, his family was there. I heard he had the nurses chuckling and laughing, even right up to his passing. It made me say that, you know what, he deserved that. And I think we all deserve kind of in the end what we've put out there we get back. And like I said, Alvin wasn't a saint by no means of the imagination, but you know what? He died with a little bit of dignity. He died in the hospital. His family was around, and it made me feel good that I couldn't change a life lived. I couldn't change anything, but I could offer a little bit of support, and with him, even a coffee or a handshake or a quick visit, that probably meant a lot to him. So,
After you found out he died, what was the walking the beat that day or evening like for you?
well, you know what? I after writing my blog, I came in and you know what? Even to this day, it's been a couple of years now. I'll go and I'll glance in the bank, and he was always in the National Bank downtown, and he used to in there. And my partner and I joked that was the National Bank of Alvin. And he'd always be in there, and he'd be sitting there, and he'd be playing solitary sometimes, or he'd be sleeping or whatever. And I'd go tap on the glass, and he'd look up at me, and he'd laugh and give me a thumbs up, and away you go. But you know, it's different out there that he's been gone. And there are other guys that have kind of came and went that I've helped out in the same way that him, and bonded with them good, and seen a few of those guys kind of get sober and get moving on with their lives, and then see a few other guys still spiral downwards with the addictions. But yeah, it's different out there since he's been gone now. His spirit's still there by no means of the imagination. It's not gone anywhere, but his physical presence is not there.
There's a reason why this man's story continues.
Yeah, totally.
It's undeniable.
Yeah. Well, when you look at people that are on the street, nobody's out there by choice.
Yeah.
Alvin, interestingly enough, and I had numerous discussions with people, and through whatever, Alvin was on the street, and he did have a place to go to his sisters, and I know he could have been housed or had a place to go, but he, in renouncing everything that we consider as normal modern day society, he removed himself to the outskirts. But yet, like you mentioned before, he's that holy man up on the mountain that everybody says, well, hey, maybe we're doing it wrong, and he's doing something right. So who knows?
Who knows?
Yeah.
That's for everybody to decide. First of all, thank you for bringing Alvin's story to my series. I wasn't just having an off morning when I heard that interview and thought, why do I feel I need to do this? And became really obsessed with it. Yeah. That there is a reason why. So thank you for your contribution to that. And secondly, and just as importantly, thank you for everything you're doing out there on the street.
Well, you know, like I said before, police officers, when most people are running away from trouble, we're running towards it. And it takes a special breed to be out there and do what we do. But in the end, we're no different than nobody else. We don't do anything that anybody else don't do. Like I said, I want to live in a safe community. And you can look past it and say, you know what? There's probably not a person listening to this or out there that doesn't have someone in their family that's dealt with abuse issues, that's dealt with addictions issues, that's dealing with mental health issues. And like you mentioned before, it don't take long to fall through the cracks. I would hope one day that if something ever happened to me, that somebody would be kind enough to stop and talk to me or buy me a coffee if I was down and out and had lost everything. So, you know what? I think that paying things back, paying things forward, giving hope to someone who has lost all their own is important. And like I said, I'm no different than nobody else. I didn't write anything about Alvin, or I'm not talking to you today to boost me up or whatever.
Not at all.
But it's you know what, it just shows that everybody deserves to be treated with fairness and dignity and respect. And we live in a busy culture. And if I could give anybody out there that's listening to this a little bit of advice, I'd say slow down. Slow down and take time to kind of see what's going on around you, because there's a lot going on around us that we don't take time to do. And as a beat officer, I'm at a slow pace. I'm walking maybe 3 kilometers, 4 kilometers an hour. I see a lot of stuff downtown that nobody else sees. So take the time to stop and smell the roses, so to say.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure, Kevin.
Thanks for listening. The SaskScapes podcast is created by Kevin Power as part of the Culture Days Animateur program operated by Sask Culture. Funding to the cultural sector is provided through the Saskatchewan Lotteries Trust Fund for Sports, Culture and Recreation. If you want to hear more of these podcasts, or to see the great work being done by other Sask Culture animateurs, please visit www.iheartculture.ca. Special thanks to Paved Arts in Saskatoon for their technical support. SaskScapes podcasts are also available through the iTunes Store. Music for SaskScapes is provided by Saskatchewan-born singer-songwriter Jeffrey Straker. There is no end to the stories to be told. So, until next time,